The early morning light filtered through the frosted windows, casting a soft glow over the room. With a contented sigh, I wrapped myself tighter in the warmth of my favorite blanket, feeling the crackling flames of the fireplace dance before me. Outside, the world was painted in shades of white as snow fell steadily from the heavens, blanketing the landscape in a serene hush. I nestled deeper into the cushions of the armchair, a steaming mug of cocoa cradled between my hands. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of pine from the crackling logs, creating an atmosphere of unparalleled comfort. It was the perfect day to stay indoors, to indulge in the simple pleasures of a cozy home and the company of one's own thoughts. With each flicker of the flames, I found myself drifting into a state of tranquil contemplation. The world outside seemed to fade away as I lost myself in the pages of a well-loved book, the words transporting me to distant lands and forgotten adventures. Time lost its meaning as I surrendered myself to the embrace of the fire, content to let the hours slip by unnoticed. As the morning turned to afternoon, I relished the opportunity to simply be, to exist in a state of quiet solitude away from the chaos of the outside world. The snow continued to fall outside, softening the harsh edges of reality and cocooning me in a world of my own making. And so, as the day stretched on and the fire burned low, I found myself grateful for the simple joys of a cozy day off, for the chance to rest and recharge amidst the gentle embrace of winter's embrace. Little did I know, however, that beyond the warmth of my hearth, a storm was brewing, and with it, a darkness that would soon descend upon my tranquil sanctuary. As the afternoon waned and the daylight began to dim, I reluctantly tore myself away from the comfort of my armchair and wandered over to the window, drawn by the distant murmur of the television. The soft glow of the screen illuminated the room, casting long shadows against the walls as I gazed out at the wintry scene beyond. The news anchor's voice filled the room, solemn and foreboding, as they spoke of the impending storm. High winds and fierce blizzards were predicted to sweep across the region, transforming the tranquil landscape into a battleground of ice and snow. My heart quickened with apprehension as I listened, the warmth of the fire suddenly seeming feeble against the cold reality of the outside world. I watched in silence as images of the approaching storm flashed across the screen, each gust of wind and flurry of snow serving as a grim reminder of the power of nature's wrath. The weatherman's voice was tinged with urgency as he issued warnings to those in the storm's path, urging them to seek shelter and prepare for the worst. A shiver ran down my spine as I turned away from the window, the weight of the impending storm settling like a heavy cloak upon my shoulders. Outside, the snow continued to fall in thick, swirling flakes, each one a harbinger of the chaos to come. As the night descended and the storm outside intensified, I found myself drawn once again to the window, unable to resist the urge to peer out into the swirling darkness. The snow fell in thick, heavy curtains, obscuring the world beyond in a veil of white. Yet, amidst the chaos of the storm, something caught my eye. A shadowy figure moved through the backyard, a dark silhouette against the blanket of snow. My breath caught in my throat as I watched, heart pounding in my chest. Who could be out in such treacherous weather, and what could possibly compel them to venture into the storm's icy embrace? With a sense of mounting unease, I pressed closer to the window, straining to catch a glimpse of the mysterious intruder. As I watched, the figure paused, head turning towards the house as if sensing my gaze upon them. For a fleeting moment, our eyes met across the expanse of snow, sending a chill down my spine. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the figure vanished into the night, swallowed up by the swirling tempest. My heart still racing, I stepped back from the window, hands trembling with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Who was the mysterious stranger that had dared to venture into the storm? As the minutes ticked by, I found myself unable to shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. The storm raged on outside, relentless in its fury, but it was not the howling wind or the driving snow that kept me awake that night. It was the memory of the shadowy figure moving through the darkness. It was then that a sharp knock shattered the silence, echoing through the quiet confines of the house like a gunshot. Startled, I jumped to my feet, heart pounding in my chest as I made my way cautiously towards the front door. Who could be out in such a fierce storm, seeking shelter in the dead of night? With trembling hands, I reached for the doorknob, heart racing with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. As I swung the door open, a gust of icy wind swept into the house, carrying with it the swirling snow and bitter chill of the night. And there, standing on the threshold, was the stranger from the backyard. His face was pale and drawn, illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. His clothes were soaked through with melted snow, clinging to his shivering form like a second skin. Yet despite the harshness of the storm outside, there was something about the man's presence that set my nerves on edge. "Please," he pleaded, voice trembling with cold and desperation. "I am sorry to intrude, but I'm lost and I have nowhere else to go. Can I wait out the storm at your place?" I hesitated, torn between the instinct to offer aid to a fellow traveler in need and the nagging sense of unease that tugged at the edges of my mind. But in the end, compassion won out over caution, and I stepped aside to allow the stranger entry into the warmth of my home. As he stepped over the threshold, a chill seemed to settle over the room, the air thick with tension and unspoken fears. I offered him a seat by the fire, casting a wary glance in his direction as he gratefully accepted, hands trembling as he reached out towards the flickering flames. And as I watched the stranger huddled by the fire, his presence casting long shadows against the walls, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. With the stranger now seated by the fire, his trembling form bathed in the flickering glow of the flames, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that settled like a heavy weight upon my shoulders. Despite my efforts to push aside my doubts, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered warnings of danger, urging me to remain vigilant. As I moved about the room, fetching a warm blanket for the stranger, I couldn't help but cast furtive glances in his direction, searching for any hint of deception or malice in his demeanor. But to my surprise, he seemed genuinely grateful for my hospitality, offering only a feeble smile of thanks as he accepted the offerings. With the stranger now seated by the crackling fireplace, seeking refuge from the biting cold, I ventured into the kitchen to prepare him a cup of steaming coffee. The gentle hum of the kettle filled the air as I busied myself with the task, momentarily distracted from the events unfolding around me. But then, as if summoned by some unseen force, a sound pierced the silence, causing me to freeze in my tracks. It was a subtle noise, barely audible over the crackling of the fire, but it sent a shiver down my spine nonetheless. Slowly, cautiously, I turned to face the source of the disturbance, heart pounding in my chest. And there he was, the stranger, standing in the doorway, a hammer clutched tightly in his trembling hand. His eyes gleamed with an intensity that made my blood run cold, sending a surge of fear coursing through my veins. In that moment, time seemed to stand still as we stared at each other, two strangers locked in a silent battle of wills. But then, as quickly as he had appeared, the stranger recoiled, his expression contorted with fear and desperation. Without a word, he turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness of the night without so much as a backward glance. For a moment, I stood rooted to the spot, stunned by what had just occurred. But then, with trembling hands, I reached for my phone and dialed the emergency number, my voice shaking as I relayed the details of the encounter to the dispatcher on the other end. As I waited for the police to arrive, a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy blanket, the memory of the stranger's chilling gaze lingering in the air long after he had vanished into the night. And as I watched the swirling snow outside, I couldn't help but wonder who was the stranger, and what had driven him to my doorstep on such a fateful night. The golden hues of the setting sun cast long shadows across the path as I ambled along, relishing the rare freedom of a day off from the usual hustle and bustle of life. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, a welcome respite from the stifling heat of the summer days. As I walked, the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets provided a soothing soundtrack to my solitary stroll. Lost in my thoughts, I rounded a bend in the path, my mind wandering to mundane matters of daily life. But then, as if from nowhere, it appeared, a figure lurking behind a bush, its form obscured by the fading light of the day. My heart lurched in my chest as I came to an abrupt halt, my eyes widening in disbelief. There, emerging from the shadows, was a clown. Its garish makeup seemed to glow in the dimming light, the exaggerated grin painted upon its face sending a shiver down my spine. For a moment, we stood locked in a silent, unspoken exchange, the weight of its gaze bearing down upon me like an invisible force. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry as fear clawed at my insides. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee from this eerie encounter, but my feet remained rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the sheer absurdity of the situation. And then, just as swiftly as it had appeared, the clown vanished back into the shadows, leaving me standing alone on the deserted path, my heart pounding in my chest and my mind reeling with unanswered questions. As I continued on my way home, the memory of that unsettling encounter lingered like a dark cloud overhead, casting a pall of unease over the once familiar surroundings. Little did I know that this would be only the beginning of a series of chilling events that would shake me to my core. The encounter with the clown had left me shaken, but I tried to shake off the unease as I made my way back home. The comforting familiarity of my neighborhood should have eased my nerves, but every shadow seemed to hold a sinister secret, and every rustle of leaves sent a shiver down my spine. When I finally reached the safety of my house, I breathed a sigh of relief, eager to put the encounter behind me. But as I stepped through the threshold, the memory of the clown's painted face lingered in the back of my mind like a specter refusing to be banished. "Mom, I'm home," I called out, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to sound calm. But as I recounted the strange encounter on the path, her brow furrowed in concern. "Are you sure it wasn't just a prank, Roger?" she asked, her tone laced with skepticism. "You know how kids can be, especially around this time of year." But I knew what I had seen, and it wasn't the product of some elaborate hoax. The fear in the clown's eyes had been all too real, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As the evening wore on, I tried to distract myself with the mindless chatter of the television, but my nerves were on edge, every creak of the floorboards and gust of wind outside sending my heart racing. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to face the window, my pulse quickening with a sickening sense of dread. There, illuminated by the soft glow of the street lamp outside, stood the clown. Its painted face leered at me from the darkness, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly intensity. With a gasp, I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest as a surge of primal fear coursed through my veins. This was no prank, no harmless joke. This was something far more sinister, something that defied rational explanation. Not knowing what to do, I ran to the window and pulled the curtain. The days that followed the chilling encounter with the clown were filled with an oppressive sense of dread that seemed to cling to me like a second skin. But it was in the dead of night, when the world was shrouded in darkness and the silence of the house seemed to echo with unseen whispers, that the true horror began to unfold. As I lay in bed, tossing and turning in a fitful sleep, a faint sound caught my attention, a soft, rhythmic thumping that seemed to emanate from somewhere above. With a sense of trepidation, I climbed out of bed and made my way to the attic door, my hand trembling as I reached for the pull cord that would illuminate the darkness beyond. With a hesitant tug, the light flooded the narrow staircase, casting long shadows that danced like specters in the flickering glow. As I ascended into the gloom, the air grew thick with the scent of dust and decay, the weight of centuries seeming to press down upon me with each step. And then, at last, I reached the summit, the attic, a forgotten realm of forgotten treasures and forgotten memories. But amidst the jumble of boxes and forgotten relics, something lurked, a presence that sent a shiver down my spine and set my pulse racing with a sickening sense of dread. There, in the far corner of the attic, stood the clown. Its painted face seemed to leer at me from the darkness, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly intensity that sent a chill down my spine. For a moment, we stood locked in a silent, unspoken exchange, the weight of its gaze bearing down upon me like an invisible force. And then, with a sudden burst of movement, the clown lunged forward, its painted grin twisting into a grotesque mockery of a smile as it reached out with gnarled fingers that seemed to stretch and contort like twisted branches. With a cry of fear, I stumbled backwards, tripping over the detritus that littered the attic floor as I scrambled to escape the clutches of this unholy terror. And as I fled the attic, my heart pounding in my chest and my breath coming in ragged gasps. After my harrowing escape from the attic, I found myself cowering behind the kitchen table, my heart pounding in my chest with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. Regret gnawed at me like a festering wound as I berated myself for not calling the police when I saw him outside the window. Instead, I had pulled the curtain closed and lived in fear, hoping that the nightmare would simply disappear on its own. But there was no escaping the truth now. The clown was real, and it was coming for me. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the hallway. My breath caught in my throat as I watched in horror as the clown burst into the room, its painted face contorted into a twisted grin that sent a shiver down my spine. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice trembling with fear as I scrambled backwards, my hand groping blindly for something, anything, to defend myself. But the clown paid no heed to my pleas, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly intensity as it stalked towards me with predatory grace. "Mom, help!" I screamed, my voice echoing off the walls as I watched in terror as the clown reached out with gnarled fingers that seemed to stretch and contort like twisted branches. And then, Just as it seemed that all hope was lost, there was a sudden burst of noise, a loud clang that reverberated through the room like a gunshot. With a cry of relief, I turned to see my mom standing over me, a frying pan raised high above her head, her face a mask of determination and defiance. "Get away from my son, you monster," she yelled, her voice ringing out in a desperate cry for help as she swung the pan with all her might. The clown staggered backwards, its painted grin twisting into a grotesque mask of pain and surprise as it stumbled and fell to the ground with a resounding thud. With a cry of triumph, my mom reached out and grabbed my hand, pulling me to my feet as we fled out of the house, our hearts pounding in our chests as we left the nightmare behind us. As we waited for the police to arrive, we clung to each other on the curb, the echoes of the confrontation still ringing in our ears. But amidst the chaos and confusion, there was a sense of relief, a glimmer of hope that we had finally escaped the darkness that had threatened to consume us. "It's over, Roger," my mom whispered, her voice trembling with emotion as she squeezed my hand tightly. "We're safe now." And then, at last, the flashing lights of the police cars appeared on the horizon, casting long shadows that danced like specters in the darkness. With a sense of grim determination, we watched as the officers swarmed the house, their voices raised in urgent conversation as they searched for the source of the disturbance. It wasn't long before they emerged from the darkness, their faces grim and solemn as they led a familiar figure towards us in handcuffs. My heart stopped as I recognized the face of our neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, a man with whom we had shared a long-standing feud that had simmered beneath the surface for years. "What's going on, Mr. Jenkins demanded, his voice tinged with confusion and disbelief as he glared at us with undisguised hostility. "You know exactly what's going on," my mom replied, her voice cold and steely as she stared him down with a look of defiance. "You've been terrorizing us for weeks, haven't you?" Mr. Jenkins scoffed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes as he glanced nervously at the police officers surrounding him. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, but his voice wavered with uncertainty, betraying the lie. But my mom wasn't buying it. "Save it, Mr. Jenkins," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "We know it was you. We saw you outside our window, and we know you were the one wearing that clown costume." With a resigned sigh, Mr. Jenkins hung his head, his shoulders slumping in defeat as he finally confessed to his crimes. "Fine, you caught me," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the night. "But it was just a prank. I never meant to hurt anyone." But my mom wasn't satisfied with his excuses. "A prank?" she scoffed. "You call terrorizing us in our own home a prank?" As the officers led Mr. Jenkins away, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, a weight lifted from my shoulders as the darkness that had plagued us for so long was finally banished into the night. And as the lights of the police cars faded into the distance, I knew that we had finally escaped the nightmare that had haunted us for so long. The city had become suffocating, its noise and chaos wearing me down day by day. So, when I stumbled upon a listing for an isolated Airbnb cabin nestled deep within the woods, I didn't hesitate to book it for a much-needed escape. As I drove up winding roads, the scenery changed from concrete jungles to lush greenery, the anticipation built with each passing mile, until finally, I arrived at my secluded sanctuary. The cabin stood before me, a rustic beauty surrounded by towering trees, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. With a sense of relief flooding over me, I stepped out of my car and took in my surroundings. The air was crisp and clean, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth. It was a welcome change from the smog-filled streets I'd grown accustomed to. Unlocking the door, I stepped inside the cabin, greeted by the warmth of a crackling fire and the cozy embrace of rustic furnishings. The place felt like a haven, a refuge from the chaos of the outside world. As I unpacked my belongings, a sense of peace washed over me. I imagined the quiet evenings spent by the fireplace, the tranquil mornings sipping coffee on the porch. This was exactly what I needed. Just as I settled in, a knock echoed through the cabin, breaking the silence. I hesitated for a moment before making my way to the door. Who could it be? I wondered, my curiosity piqued. Opening the door, I was greeted by a friendly face, the Airbnb host who had graciously welcomed me to the cabin. We exchanged pleasantries, and he offered some tips for exploring the area. "Make sure to take a hike through the woods," he suggested with a smile. "There are some beautiful trails nearby." I nodded, grateful for the recommendation. "Thank you," I replied, feeling a sense of excitement bubbling within me. As the host bid me farewell and drove off into the distance, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anticipation for the adventures that lay ahead. This weekend was going to be exactly what I needed: a chance to disconnect, unwind, and find solace in the tranquility of nature. Little did I know, however, that my peaceful getaway would soon take a sinister turn. After settling into the cabin, I felt an irresistible pull to explore the surrounding woods. The forest beckoned with promises of serenity and adventure, and I eagerly obliged. Stepping outside, I inhaled deeply, the crisp forest air filling my lungs. The sunlight filtered through the canopy above, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. With each step, the soft crunch of leaves beneath my boots echoed through the tranquil surroundings. As I wandered deeper into the woods, a sense of peace washed over me. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirping of birds. It was as if the outside world had ceased to exist, leaving me enveloped in a cocoon of tranquility. Lost in thought, I rounded a bend in the trail and froze in my tracks. There, just ahead, stood a figure amidst the trees. A man, tall and rugged, with a weathered face and piercing eyes. "Hello?" I called out tentatively, my voice barely a whisper in the vast expanse of the forest. The man turned towards me, his expression unreadable. "Hello there," he replied, his voice gruff yet strangely soothing. I felt a surge of relief flood through me. "I'm just out for a hike," I explained, gesturing to the trail behind me. "I'm staying at the cabin down the road." The man nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Ah, I see. Enjoying the peace and quiet of the woods, are you?" I nodded enthusiastically, unable to contain my excitement. "Yes, it's beautiful out here. Do you hike often?" The man chuckled softly, a twinkle in his eye. "You could say that," he replied cryptically, before turning to continue on his way. As he disappeared into the depths of the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the pit of my stomach. Who was he, and why did he seem to appear out of nowhere? Brushing aside my apprehension, I forged ahead, determined to enjoy my hike despite the encounter. As evening descended upon the cabin, I decided to unwind by watching a movie. The cozy glow of the fireplace cast dancing shadows across the room, and I settled onto the couch, enveloped in the warmth of the crackling flames. Just as the movie reached its climax, a sudden sound shattered the silence, the faint chime of a doorbell. My heart skipped a beat, the unexpected noise sending a jolt of adrenaline coursing through my veins. Who could be calling at this hour? Cautiously, I made my way to the door, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. Peering through the peephole, I was met with the sight of a familiar figure standing on the porch, the woodsman I had encountered earlier that day. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I opened the door, the cool night air washing over me. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the unease gnawing at my gut. The man offered a friendly smile, though his eyes held a glint of something I couldn't quite place. "Evening," he greeted, his voice gruff yet strangely soothing. "I hate to bother you, but I seem to have lost my way in the woods. Mind if I come in and use your phone to call for help?" A surge of apprehension washed over me, my instincts screaming at me to refuse his request. But I couldn't shake the feeling of obligation, the ingrained politeness that compelled me to offer assistance to a stranger in need. "Of course," I replied, stepping aside to let him enter. "Come on in." As the man crossed the threshold into the cabin, a shiver ran down my spine. There was something off about him, something that set my nerves on edge, but I pushed aside my doubts, chalking it up to paranoia. Leading him to the living room, I gestured towards the phone on the end table. "Feel free to use the phone," I offered, my voice betraying a hint of unease. "I'll just be in the other room if you need anything." The man nodded gratefully, his eyes lingering on me for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," he replied, his tone oddly formal. "I'll only be a moment." With that, I retreated to the kitchen, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. Was I making a mistake by letting him into the cabin, or was I simply overreacting to a harmless stranger in need of assistance? As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. The memory of the woodsman's unexpected visit replayed in my mind like a sinister melody, each note sending shivers down my spine. I paced the length of the cabin, my footsteps echoing off the walls. Something wasn't right, I could feel it in my bones. But try as I might, I couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that had settled over me like a suffocating blanket. Desperate for reassurance, I reached for my phone and dialed my friend's number, the familiar ringtone a lifeline in the darkness. As they picked up on the other end, relief flooded through me like a tidal wave. "Hey, it's me," I began, my voice trembling with barely contained fear. "I need to tell you about something that happened earlier." As I recounted the events of the evening, the woodsman's unexpected visit, the eerie sense of unease that had settled over me like a shroud, my friend listened intently, their concern evident in the hushed tones of their voice. "That sounds really creepy," they replied, their words a balm to my frayed nerves. "Are you sure everything's okay?" I hesitated, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me like a leaden weight. "I don't know," I admitted, the admission tasting bitter on my tongue, "but I can't shake the feeling that something's not right." My friend's reassurances did little to ease my troubled mind, the specter of the woodsman's visit looming large in my thoughts. What did he want? Sleep eluded me as the night pressed on, the unsettling events of the evening replaying in my mind like a haunting melody. The cabin, once a haven, now felt like a trap closing in around me. With each passing moment, my anxiety escalated, and the walls seemed to close in. Determined to make sense of the eerie encounters, I decided to reach out to the local authorities. The phone call to the sheriff's office was met with a courteous response, but as I detailed the strange occurrences, there was an underlying skepticism in the deputy's voice. "Look, we'll send someone to check it out," the deputy assured me, "but it's probably just some local folks messing around. You're in a remote area, and pranks happen." Pranks, I thought. It was a plausible explanation, but the nagging feeling persisted that there was more to the woodsman's actions than mere mischief. Restlessly, I waited for the authorities to arrive, anxiety gnawing at my every thought. The isolation of the cabin became suffocating, and every rustle outside the window felt like a prelude to something more sinister. Suddenly, a knock echoed through the cabin. My heart raced, fear tightening its grip as I approached the door with trepidation. Opening it cautiously, I was met by the sheriff and a deputy, their stern expressions hinting at a lack of urgency. "We checked around, didn't find anything suspicious," the sheriff declared, his tone dismissive. "Probably just someone from the nearby cabins messing with you. Happens all the time." "But he was inside my cabin," I stammered, desperation evident in my voice. "He claimed to be lost, but he's been here twice now. There's something off about him." The sheriff exchanged a skeptical glance with his deputy. "Lost folks sometimes wander where they shouldn't," he remarked, a note of impatience in his voice. "Keep your doors locked, and you'll be fine." With that, they left, leaving me with a sinking feeling that I was on my own. As the night persisted, I fortified the cabin, locking doors and windows, yet the unsettling sensation lingered like a haunting specter. As dawn broke, casting pale light through the cabin windows, I ventured outside cautiously. The woods, once inviting, now seemed to conceal secrets that threatened to unravel my sanity. My phone buzzed, startling me. It was my friend, checking in on me after the harrowing night. I hesitated before answering, the weight of the events settling heavily on my shoulders. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice cracking. "The sheriff didn't take it seriously, and I can't shake the feeling that something is terribly wrong." My friend's response was a mix of concern and reassurance. "We'll figure this out together. Maybe it's time to consider leaving the cabin and heading back home. Your safety is the priority." The suggestion resonated with a sense of urgency. Gathering my belongings, I left the isolated retreat that had turned from a haven into a nightmare.